Hello and welcome to the Intentional Brief, your weekly video update on the one big thing in cybersecurity news for middle market companies, their investors, and executive teams. I'm your host, Shay Colson, managing partner at Intentional Cybersecurity, and you can find us online at intentionalcyber.com. Today is Monday, April 28th, 2025, and because the annual RSA Security Conference is up this week in San Francisco, we've got a fresh batch of reports that have dropped. So we'll get you caught up on the latest threat intelligence and trends from Verizon, from Google, and from the FBI. So we're going to pull out some highlights from these three reports this week, all of which have traditionally been published annually, although I will note it's entirely possible that these reports may not continue in this same fashion moving forward, particularly the FBI's report, given the focus and changes that are happening in the big picture. But these big three reports have been long running, and we're looking forward to reading them every year. Again, this is the Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report, or DBIR, the FBI's Internet Crime Report from their Internet Crimes Center, or IC3, and then Google's M-Trends Report, which is from their Mandiant acquisition of a few years back. And we're going to start actually with Google's report, which is based on their Mandiant subsidiary. It seems like a long time ago that Google bought Mandiant. I even had to look that up again to remind myself when I was reading the reports and doing the prep for today's episode. But a couple of things from the M-Trends report that stood out to me. One of the first is that they note that phishing has declined as an initial threat vector, and it has been replaced by the use of exploits, also known as 0 days or sometimes just run-of-the-mill vulnerabilities that you didn't get around to patching. And in conjunction with this, they also note that dwell time, or the time that attackers are spending in the environment prior to launching their attack, is down again this year. This indicates to me a couple of things working in tandem. First, I think we've collectively gotten better through endpoint detection and response tools at detecting this type of malicious activity, so attackers aren't able to dwell as long. And secondly, attackers are much more opportunistic now, launching attacks on these vulnerable systems when they know they're vulnerable, not necessarily waiting. So we're seeing both of those reduce in increased use of exploits and a decreased amount of dwell time. Google's M-Trends report also notes that the changing landscape in tools and threats includes a focus still on info stealers, one of their top threats, and then actor-wise, they're looking still at North Korea and Iran towards the top of that leaderboard, at least from the Google Mandiant perspective. The Verizon DBIR, long heralded as the gold standard in this space, continues to offer great insight. Like Google, they also note a significant rise in vulnerability exploitation as an initial attack vector and a drop in credential abuse. Verizon's statistics, I think, shed some good light on the challenges that defenders are facing, including a couple of these gems. One, they note that half of all systems infected with info stealers, which Google flagged as being critically important to defend against, were not managed, meaning they're likely BYOD devices that don't have the same amount of security or tooling and alerting that corporate systems do. Verizon also notes that third parties now account for 30% of breaches, and that 60% of breaches involve a human interaction, whether that's phishing, social engineering, etc. And while that last number of 60% may seem high, it's actually down from 80% in 2021. Verizon also noted a significant uptick in what they're calling espionage events, and it's the second largest attacker motivation behind a financial motivation, financial being 89%, espionage being 17%, and other being less than 1%. So either we're out here spying or we're out here trying to get paid if you're an attacker. And these espionage attacks, interestingly, do account for 62% of what Verizon calls basic web application attacks, which is up from 10 to 20% historically. So a significant amount of focus on those web applications from our espionage actors. The last interesting tidbit here from Verizon is that AI use amongst attackers is flagged as increasing, but still representing less than 10% of malicious email traffic from an attacker perspective, which, I think that's somewhat of a lagging indicator. I think we'll see more use of AI in those attacks in this next year's report as the tool becomes more readily available and the value becomes more clear, even for the bad guys. So keep our eye on that. And finally, of the big three reports, the FBI's IC3 report, the headlines here are frankly pretty grim. They note $16.6 billion in losses, up from $12.5 billion last year. They note that investment scams are now accounting for the majority of losses, totaling $6.5 billion, up from $4.5 billion last year. Business email compromise is right there at number 2, although it has actually dropped down a tick, $200 million from $2.9 billion to $2.7 billion. And they note that $9.3 billion of the total losses took place via crypto instead of the US dollar for the first time as the currency that has been most impacted. Finally, the most exploited group in the FBI's report are the 60 plus demographic, and by a wide margin. I think the rest of this report helps give some good financial details to the types of crimes and tactics that we're seeing the criminals use, and it does make clear that we've still got a long way to go in combating these threats. What strikes me most about the FBI's report compared to the other two is that it is largely focused on individuals and the impact that they feel compared to the more corporate or enterprise approach from what Google or Verizon offer. Unfortunately, all of these reports reiterate the need for us to keep up our awareness and defenses both at home and at work, and also with our aging population in particular. So if you have not done your rounds and checked on your people, it might be a good time to do that. You don't necessarily need to make them read this report. If you can help understand what those threats are and put a few defenses in place, I think we'll all be better off for it. From a fundraising perspective, a relatively quiet and humble week totaling just over $7 billion in newly committed capital, led by LLR Partners, who raised $2.45 billion for their seventh flagship mid-market PE fund. Quiet from the Financial Times, quiet from the Wall Street Journal. I think there's other things going on. We're just trying to let a couple of market elements settle out. No major IPOs that we're tracking right now, although I can see a few of those tech or security plays coming to market in the near future. We'll just have to keep an eye on that. As a reminder, you can find links to all the articles we covered below, including those original source reports. You can find back issues of these videos and written transcripts at intentionalcyber.com, and we will see you next week for another edition of the Intentional Brief.